All right, let's dive into Shakespeare, shall we? The Merchant of Venice. It's a play full of complex characters, surprising twists, and of course, timeless themes that we still feel today. It's like we're stepping right back in time to Venice, with a guide to help us understand all the action.
And there's a lot of action. This play is about love, justice, mercy, and even prejudice, all woven into Shakespeare's brilliant storytelling.
So, two really different places where this all takes place. Venice, a busy city known for commerce, and let's be honest, ruthless business deals. And Belmont, a beautiful estate that feels much more idyllic and romantic. That contrast can't be a coincidence, right?
Not at all. Think of it this way. Venice is where we see the hard points of life. Contracts, laws, and harsh consequences. Belmont is more like an escape, where love and mercy are more important. As we see the characters move between these two places, their choices show us how much those values are in conflict.
I see how the setting adds to all the drama. So let's talk about these characters. First, we have Antonio, a wealthy merchant, but he's got this deep sadness about him. Shakespeare never tells us why.
And that makes Antonio really interesting, don't you think? His sadness just hangs over him, even though he's got friends and seems to have it all. This unexplained melancholy makes him easy to relate to. He makes us ask ourselves, what makes us sad, even when things seem to be good?
That's true. We've all felt that. Feeling down and not knowing why. Then we have Bassanio, Antonio's good friend who's in love with Portia, a wealthy and clever heiress. But he needs money to try and get her to marry him, which leads him down a dangerous path.
A path that leads him to Shylock, the Jewish moneylender. Now, Shylock is a character that people have debated forever. Villain, victim, everything in between. That's what makes him so interesting.
Definitely. And to make things even more intense, Shylock doesn't want a normal interest payment on the loan he gives Bassanio. He wants a pound of Antonio's flesh if Bassanio can't repay him on time. Now, those are some high stakes.
That pound of flesh, it's one of the most famous and controversial parts of the play. Of course, it's not really about the meat. It's a metaphor, a symbol. And to really understand it, we have to understand the history of the time.
I'd love to hear more.
Well, when Shakespeare was writing, there were these awful accusations against Jewish people called blood libel. They were false claims that Jewish people used the blood of Christian children for religious rituals, and those accusations led to violence and really bad treatment of Jewish people. So when Shylock, a Jewish man, asks for a pound of Antonio's flesh, it reminds the audience of those fears and prejudices from that time.
Wow. So it's not just a strange request, it's a reflection of the real dangers and prejudice that Jewish people faced.
Exactly. Shakespeare isn't just telling a story, he's forcing his audience to look at the ugliness of prejudice and ask if justice really exists when there is so much bias.
Okay, so we have all this going on, prejudice, a life or death contract. But there's also a love story happening at the same time, right? Tell me about Portia, the woman Bassanio wants to marry.
Portia is not your typical woman in these plays. She's smart, rich, and her dead father left her with an unusual will. Any man who wants to marry her has to solve a riddle about 3 caskets: gold, silver, and lead.
So it's not just about money and charm to marry Portia. You have to be worthy.
Exactly. Each casket has an inscription that gives you a clue, a moral lesson. And it's so interesting to watch how some of the men are tricked by just how the caskets look.
Like the Prince of Morocco. He goes straight for the gold casket, thinking it must have the best prize inside. But when he opens it, he finds a skull and a message that says, "All that glitters is not gold."
It's like a slap in the face, isn't it? It reminds us that we can't just go by what we see on the outside. What's really valuable is often hidden in the choices we make and who we really are.
That's a good lesson for all of us. Don't judge a book by its cover, or a casket by its metal. And what about the Prince of Aragon, the other suitor who tries his luck with the caskets?
Oh, the Prince of Aragon. He thinks he's better than everyone else. He's sure he deserves to marry Portia just because he's a prince. He picks the silver casket, thinking it shows how important he is.
And what did he find inside?
Not Portia, that's for sure. He finds a picture of a fool. It's like Shakespeare saying that thinking you're better than everyone else without really understanding your own worth can lead to really bad decisions.
2 suitors down, and both failed the test. But before we find out if Bassanio will pass, let's talk about another love story, one that makes this play even more complicated.
You mean Lorenzo and Jessica. Jessica is Shylock's daughter, and she falls for Lorenzo, a Christian. Their story has a lot to do with rebelling, identity, and the hard choices you make for love.
And it's not easy for them, is it? What are some of the problems they face?
Well, Jessica's father, Shylock, is very protective of his daughter and doesn't trust Christians. Remember, he's living in a world that treats him differently, where he faces prejudice and discrimination just because he's Jewish.
So it makes sense why he would be so protective and distrusting. But what about Jessica?
She chooses love and freedom over the life her father wants her to live. She runs away with Lorenzo, but, well, this makes us think even harder about Shylock. She steals her father's jewels and money when she leaves.
That's a really big decision. So Shylock isn't just this moneylender wanting a pound of flesh. His own daughter has hurt him, adding even more pain to his story.
Right, that betrayal, the loss and injustice, it all makes him want revenge against Antonio. He becomes obsessed with that pound of flesh, refusing anything else.
This sets us up for one of the most famous scenes, the courtroom scene.
The scene where justice and mercy fight, a battle of words. Shylock wants the law to be followed exactly, while Portia, dressed as a man, shows up to change everything.
So Shylock wants his pound of flesh, and Portia's in the courtroom dressed as a man. What happens next? This part always makes me nervous.
It really changes things in the play. You can feel the tension as Shylock keeps pushing for what he wants, and Portia is so smart, working within the law, trying to save Antonio's life.
You mentioned her quality of mercy speech.
Oh, right.
Can you remind me about that?
Of course. Portia, still disguised as a man, gives this amazing speech about mercy. She's basically saying that mercy is like something from God. It goes beyond the rules of the law. She wants Shylock to show compassion, to forget about revenge. It's this powerful moment that makes you think about justice versus mercy.
How does Shylock react to all that?
He doesn't want it. He's so focused on revenge, on all the years of people treating him badly, that he can't see any other way. He wants his pound of flesh. That's it.
Wow, so is that it for Antonio then?
This is where Portia shows how smart she is. She agrees that Shylock can have his pound of flesh because of the contract, but she points out one really important thing that Shylock forgot.
What is it? Tell me.
The contract says he can take a pound of flesh, but it doesn't say anything about blood. Portia says if Shylock spills even one drop of Antonio's blood when he takes the flesh, he'll be breaking the law.
Wow. That's incredible. She uses his obsession with the law against him. It's amazing.
It is. Portia shows how ridiculous it is to only care about following the law exactly, without thinking about human life. It's a win for Antonio, but a huge loss for Shylock. He has to become a Christian and give half his money to the state.
That's a harsh punishment. It makes you wonder if it was really fair. Shylock was treated badly. He was driven to extremes. But what he wanted to do to Antonio was also extreme. Shakespeare doesn't make it easy to figure out who's right and wrong.
You're right. The ending isn't simple. It makes us think about justice, revenge, and prejudice. We think about those things even after the play is over.
So, after all that drama in the courtroom, the play goes back to Belmont. But even there, things aren't totally calm. There's the whole thing with the rings. Can you remind me about that?
Sure. Remember that Portia, dressed as the lawyer, asked Bassanio for her ring as payment for saving Antonio. Bassanio, he's torn. He promised his wife he wouldn't give the ring away, but he's grateful to the lawyer, so he gives him the ring.
And then that causes all kinds of problems when they get back to Belmont. Portia and Nerissa, her maid, who is also disguised, confront their husbands about the missing rings. They pretend to be really mad, saying their husbands gave the rings to other women.
That whole ring thing might seem a little silly after everything that happened in the courtroom, but it's important. First, it makes you laugh a little, after all the seriousness of the trial.
Yeah, it lightens things up. But you said it was important for other reasons too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It also makes us question Bassanio's loyalty, and it shows how complicated relationships can be. He loves Portia, but he feels like he owes something to the man who saved his friend's life. It's a tough choice. Loyalty to his wife or to the lawyer?
That would be hard. So how does all this get sorted out?
In the end, Portia tells everyone who she really is. She shows them the ring, proving she was the lawyer the whole time. Everyone's happy.
Except maybe Bassanio Graziano, Portia's maid's husband. They probably feel a little dumb for doubting their wives and giving away the ring so easily.
Yeah, they're definitely embarrassed. But the important thing is, all the couples understand each other better now. They've been through a lot, and it made their relationship stronger.
So the play ends with everyone celebrating and happy. But I still keep thinking about Shylock. What happens to him after he has to become Christian and loses all that money? Does he just disappear?
That's one of the things people argue about with this play. Shakespeare doesn't tell us what happens to Shylock. Some people think he lives a sad life. He's lost his religion, his money, and his daughter.
That's pretty awful.
It is. But other people think maybe it's not all bad. Maybe Shylock finds a way to be okay. To find some peace.
Shakespeare lets us decide what we think happens to him.
That's part of what makes The Merchant of Venice so interesting, isn't it? It asks more questions than it answers. Makes you think about the characters and what it all means.
You got it. And that's why we're doing this deep dive. It's not just about understanding what happens. It's about thinking hard about things like justice, mercy, prejudice, and love.
So, now that we've talked about the story, let's get into those big ideas that Shakespeare's exploring. Justice versus mercy. That seems to be everywhere in the play, right?
For sure. Shylock wants the law to be followed exactly.
Merchant of Venice has been performed and interpreted so many different ways. It shows how society and culture have changed over time. Early productions often made Shylock seem like a bad guy, focusing on him being greedy and mean.
But more recently, people seem to have more sympathy for Shylock. They understand the prejudice he faced.
That change is because we understand anti-Semitism better now, and we know it's important to think about characters in the context of their time. We realize now how much prejudice and discrimination can affect how people behave.
So what does that mean for us today? Is The Merchant of Venice anti-Semitic? Or is it criticizing anti-Semitism?
It's a question people still debate. There's no doubt that the play uses language and stereotypes that are anti-Semitic, reflecting the prejudices of Shakespeare's time. But it also shows Shylock as a complex character, someone who makes you feel both empathy and disapproval.
He's both a victim of prejudice
Yeah.
and capable of being cruel.
Exactly. Shakespeare doesn't make it easy. He makes us think about human nature, about how destructive prejudice is, and that constant struggle between justice and mercy.
This deep dive has really made me see The Merchant of Venice in a new light. It's a play that stays with you, making you think about the world and your place in it.
It really is. It makes you think.
It does. And it's amazing how a play this old can still cause so much discussion today. People have interpreted The Merchant of Venice in so many different ways.
They have. That's what makes Shakespeare so great. He created these characters and stories that are so complex and interesting, that they still speak to people hundreds of years later, no matter where they're from.
And when you think about all those different interpretations, you have to wonder, how much do our own opinions affect how we see the play? Do we focus on Shylock's bad side because of our own prejudices, or do we see his good side because we understand more about discrimination?
Those are really important questions. I think that's why The Merchant of Venice is still relevant. It's not just an old story, it shows us who we are, our values, our biases, how we see the world.
It makes us look at those values and biases, to ask ourselves some hard questions about justice, mercy, and how we treat people who are different from us.
Exactly, and that's why we have to really think about this play, to consider different perspectives, and to understand that there are no easy answers.
I think that's what makes Shakespeare so brilliant. He doesn't tell us what to think. He gives us these complicated situations and flawed characters, and he lets us figure it out for ourselves.
He gives us the puzzle pieces. We put them together, and we might even come up with different answers as we change and grow.
That's so cool. It's a play you can keep coming back to and find something new every time.
It is. And every time we read it or see it, we bring our own experiences to it. And that makes the conversation even richer.
So, if you're looking for a play that will make you think, make you feel, and maybe even change how you see the world, I definitely recommend The Merchant of Venice.
It's a journey. And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and you'll keep discovering amazing things in Shakespeare's work. You never know what you might find.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into The Merchant of Venice. It's been a fascinating journey. Until next time.